Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Thank you for stopping by. Today we're going to take a look at installing SDR Console version 3 for use with my SDRplay RSP1A. The first thing that we'll do is navigate to the SDRplay website. We'll go to the download section and the software and documentation area. Next up, we'll choose our operating system, which in my case is going to be Windows. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find SDR Console version 3. As of January 2018, SDR Console version 3, released on the 15th of November 2017, is the most current version, so this is the one I'm going to choose. So I'll click on the download button there, and you can see down here in the lower left corner, the software is downloading. So once that's finished, we'll launch that to start the installation. Now that the download is complete, we can just click down here on this to start the installation. So Windows is coming up now and asking if we want to allow this app to make changes to our device. I'm going to say yes. So the first step is the license agreement. You can read through this if you'd like to. I'm just going to accept it and move on. The next step here is to make sure that we don't have any RSPs connected to the computer, and at the moment I don't. We'll be reconnecting that a little bit later in the installation process. Okay, so now we're ready to start the installation, so I'll click Install. So now we're presented with a license agreement for the API. Once again, I'm just going to accept that and continue. Again, we're asked to make sure there are no RSPs connected to the computer. There are not, so I'm going to continue. I'll accept this default folder for the location of the program. And this already exists because I've already done a test installation, so we're going to let it overwrite. But if you're doing this for the first time, you won't see that message. So next up, I'm going to let it create a shortcut in my Start menu so that I can find it later. And now we've just got some verification of our settings, so I'll click Install. So now we're being prompted to connect the RSP and allow the driver installation to complete before using the API. Now I'm going to connect mine up, but because I've been using my RSP with this computer, you may not see anything happen in this video, but if you're doing this for the first time, you may see your computer install the driver and recognize the RSP. So I will go ahead and connect mine now though. Now that I've got my RSP connected, I will continue on, and now I can finish. And you'll see now that setup is doing some more work here. So now we're going to start with the installation of SDR Console itself. So we're going to click Next here. Another license agreement, so we're going to agree to that. So at this stage we can choose some of the components that are loaded and created. I'm going to accept all the defaults here and continue on. I'm going to let this install for anyone using this computer, even though I'm the only one that has an account on it. So now here I'm going to just choose the default installation location and click Install. So now I'm being prompted that Visual C++ 2010 SP1 is required and will now be installed. I'm going to say OK to that. And now we need Visual C++ 2013. We'll let that go. And now it looks like the installation is complete, so we'll hit Next. And now we'll click Finish and allow the program to start. So this is the first time that I've got SDR Console started and up and running on this computer, so I'm being prompted to let me know that I need to create an SDR definition in order to get started. So what I'm going to do is click on this button right here, Definitions. So what I'll do now is make sure that I have the RSP1A connected to the computer, and I do. So I'm going to click Search to see if I can get it to automatically find my radio. So you can see I've got a list here that I can choose from. So I'm going to pick SDRplay, and you can see that it came up and it said that it found one device. So it says I have 0 SDRplay definitions, which would make sense since this is the first time we're running this. So I'm going to click Add to add this definition. So you can see it automatically knows that this is my RSP1A, It's got the correct settings for frequency and serial number and address and so on and so forth. So down here, these options, I'm going to leave these unchecked as default and just hit save. So now that we've got the definition for the RSP1A established, we'll need to select this radio to use with SDR Console. If you have multiple SDRs, you'll have multiple entries in this list, and you'll be able to choose whichever one you want to use with the program. Now when you start this up, I'm not sure if this will come up by default the second time or beyond when you run this, so you may have to bring this up from the menu if you want to switch radios. But anyway, I've just got the one radio to fool with right now, so I'm going to choose it by clicking on it, and then down here I'm going to set my default bandwidth, and you can choose here, you can see anywhere from 500 kilohertz all the way up to 10 megahertz. I'm going to choose 2 megahertz, which is this one here, and then I'm going to hit start, and let's see what we can hear. So we've got SDR Console up and running, and I've had to make a few adjustments here to make everything work with my screen capture program. Namely, I've had to adjust the screen resolution, so if things look a little different now, that's pretty much why. So I've tuned up to 10 meters. There's a local net on. I thought this would be kind of good subject matter to use while we go through some of the basic operation of SDR Console. So just looking at the main screen here, we'll just do a quick overview of what's going on. Up here we have some quick access options. Along here we have our main menu items bar. And then down here you can see when you choose a menu item, this option bar changes with the appropriate options for that particular menu item. Over here we have our receive window. This is our main frequency readout, and we can tune using this. You can see that as we move the mouse here, we get the registers highlight, and we can tune up and down that way. So right here is our main volume control. Right now you can see I have it muted. Below that is the IF display. This will show what's being passed through the passband at the moment. Down here is our mode selection options. You can see that there's some various options here by default, and we can add some of those by clicking on this button. We'll go through that a little bit later. And similarly, below the mode options, we have filter options, and that works kind of the same way. We have some presets here, and then we can add some more by clicking on that button. Below that, we have some AGC settings and other extended options that we can play with down here in the lower left. Over here on the upper right, we have the main spectrum window, the main spectrum display, and below that is the waterfall. So let's go ahead and play with this a little bit so you guys can get a feel for how it works if this is a software that you want to use. So I'm going to skip going through the quick launch items here and this ball menu. I don't tend to use those very much with this software. I prefer to use the standard menu options and settings and things like that, so I'm going to go through those. But you can obviously experiment with anything that you want to. So first up, I've got the radio stopped for the moment, just so that you can see over here, this button becomes active when the radio is not active. We can click on that, and this is where we can select the radio. And again, I've only got one radio defined here with the application right now, so we really only have one choice. So we're going to leave it at this. But if you had multiple SDRs, this is where you could switch between them. Now, of course, clicking start starts the radio, and then clicking stop stops the radio. The bandwidth button up here allows us to choose various bandwidths, in my case up to 10 megahertz. I'm going to leave it on 2 megahertz for now, just for the purposes of demonstration. But you can go as wide or narrow as you'd like. There's a button here that allows us to change calibration of the unit. I'm going to skip that for now. We're not going to need to do any of that for this demonstration. Clicking this button here allows us to manually enter in a frequency using the keyboard. You can see here we can change between entering the frequency in a plus or minus span or the frequency and a bandwidth. You can see here that this checkbox will center the spectrum window on the frequency that you type in if it's off the screen. Over here, this is where you would type in the frequency in megahertz. And then down here you could change the plus or minus span, or if we change that to bandwidth, you could change the bandwidth. And then this auto update checkbox, if you turn that on, as you type here in the frequency window, it will automatically start to tune as you type if you leave this checked in. So for now, I'm going to skip that and leave the radio tuned right where it is. The rest of this menu bar up here has some more, I'll call extended options that we're not going to need to play with just yet, so we'll skip over those for now. Over here is the receive window. You can see the main frequency readout is here. And as I mentioned before, as we scroll the mouse through here, you can see the various registers become active. And then you can use your scroll wheel on your mouse to kind of tune around if you want, up and down. Or you can see that if you move the mouse to this bar above or below the number, you can click there to move the digit to where you want it. Again, here's our mute control and our volume control. So I'm actually going to turn that up a little bit so we can start listening to some audio. So I'm going to skip over the IF display for the moment, and we'll talk about the mode panel here. You can see there's some various presets that are available. Right now we're in upper sideband, and that's denoted by sort of the yellow haze under the word. And if we want to change the mode, we just click on one of these buttons and you can see it changes the mode. I'll go back to upper sideband for the moment. So now if we want to add a mode that's not currently in the panel, we just click on this ellipse button and you can see that there are various other modes that we can check. For instance, I'll check AM, and if we say OK, now that shows up in the list and we can choose it if we want to. Similarly, down here we have some filter settings that we can play with. And you can see right now we're on 2.8 kilohertz by default, and we can change this however we want, wider or narrower. And you can see as we change it, the bandwidth display here gets narrower or wider, and it also gets narrower or wider here in the IF display. I'll go back to 2.8 kilohertz. That seems to work the best here. So now over here in the main spectrum window, you can see, if I move my mouse away, you can see the signal over there kind of peak and trough as the station is transmitting or not. And you can see down here in the waterfall that we're getting sort of a look at what the signal looks like over time. But right now in the current settings, things are a little small. We're not getting a real good snapshot of that. So if we want to kind of zoom in on that, the way to do it is to go over here into the spectrum window up here in the upper right corner. And you can see there's a zoom control that becomes active. We just come down to the slider, and if we slide it up, we can kind of zoom in a little bit and get a better idea of what's going on. So next to the zoom control, you can see there's this button with two arrows and a line, and what that'll do is that'll center what we're tuned to on the spectrum window if we click it. So if I just click that, you can see it centers everything up. So now we've got this high slider that we can kind of use to kind of zoom in or out on sort of the amplitude of the signal. You can kind of see that the signal level changes there. And similarly, the low side changes where the bottom point of the spectrum display is. So you can kind of set that wherever you want to get a good look at your signal that you're interested in. Now down here in the waterfall, we're not seeing a whole lot. We can change the contrast here by sliding this slider over on the right around a little bit to make things a little more pronounced. Now not only can we slide this window around wherever we want, we can change the upper and lower limits by just clicking and dragging. And you can kind of see that that sort of changes how the contrast works on the waterfall. Or you can go up here to the top and just click the auto button. So I'm going to move this back to right about there and leave it there. So you can see this slider at the bottom. We can click it and drag it, and that sort of drags the display around, but it doesn't change where the radio is tuned. It leaves the radio tuned to a particular frequency. But if we wanted to see what was going on nearby, we can slide that out of the way, and you can see there's some other signal over here. Now just a word on that, if we want to tune to that signal, we can just kind of bring the mouse over, find it, and then click on it, and you can see we're tuned into it. And this just happens to be noise. It's not a real signal. Maybe that's a signal. Nope, that's noise too. So either way, you can see that you don't have to tune this way. You can tune using the spectrum window. And again, if you want to center it, you just come up to this button and click that to center everything. This window down here that I have displayed is the signal history, and you can see that this shows the signal amplitude over time as we're listening to the radio. This is kind of a neat feature. I like this one. So those are pretty much the basics that you need to get going with casual listening on SDR Console. Now, there are a ton more options that you can fool around with here if you want to enhance your listening experience. So if you just want to get started with your SDR Console, you can pause the video here and get going. But at this point, I'll go through a few more of the extended options. I won't go through all of them, but I'll go through a few that I use and find useful. So looking back up here at the Home menu ribbon, you can see that there's a lot of options up here. There is an RF gain control where you can change the RF gain on the unit. I'm going to leave it at 0 max, but if you wanted to, you could turn it down by just simply clicking on it there. Up here, you can change the IF gain. I've found that for my particular setup, using the default, which is got the star next to it here, seems to work the best. So we won't fool with that. Visual gain changes just the gain of the spectrum display and the waterfall. So you can kind of get a different effect by looking at that, but that doesn't change the actual received gain of the radio. I'm going to put that back at 0 because, again, I like that the best. Over here, you can change the local oscillator mode. I'm going to leave that in automatic. So up here, we can turn on or off the bias T, and I don't have an amplified antenna, so I don't need to turn that on. I'm going to leave it off, but if you do, that's where you would turn it on. Here we have controls for the notch filters that are included with the RSP1A. This particular one, I believe, will turn on the medium wave broadcast notch filter. So we could click that to turn it on. I'm going to leave mine off for now. And then over here there's one for the digital audio broadcast. This button here brings up some information about the radio configuration, and you can see there's some information here about SDRplay. You can kind of read through, and this gives you some information about the options specific to their products. This button here will allow us to quickly go back to a previously tuned frequency. And this button here shows a history of frequencies that we've tuned in. Now, presumably this is just for the session. Up here, this button allows us to take a screenshot of what we have here currently. So if you want to do that, you just click on the button. So you can see the screenshot gets saved in this folder here automatically, and then you can open it up with one of these options here. Over here, we have some options for auto mute and noise blanker. I'm going to turn my noise blanker on, actually. We're getting a little bit of noise in the background there. Maybe that'll help. And then underneath here on both of these, you can see there's an options button that brings up a window that allows you to play around with the various options. So then I'm going to go up here to the View menu item, and you can see all the options up here change. So let's go through some of these. So if we click on this button, we can change some of the bands that are presented in the Favorites tab, which I'll go through a little bit later. So under this button here, we have some other options that we can change, some more extended options. I'm not going to cover any of these today, but if there's something that you want to do with the radio that you can't, maybe you should look under there. So over here, this button is the scale button, and you can see that this changes the vertical scale reading of what's over here in the spectrum window. So right now it's set to 90 dBm. Let's see what happens if we change it to -120. So you can see what happened. It made the upper limit -120, and you can see things look a little bit different over there now. So you can also change between dBm, dB microvolts, or S units. Let's see what happens there. Okay, so you can see this now becomes an S meter like you'd see on a ham radio. I'll go back to dBm since that's the default. So over here we have the smoothing button, and under this button we have various options to control how the spectrum waveform sort of looks. So over here, these options deal with the averaging of the waveform. You can see that in particular this period slider, if I move it to the right, will sort of slow things down a little bit. Now you can see there's a little formula down here to help you figure out how to set these based on what you might want to see or do. So you can switch between waiting or hang and delay depending on how you want to do things. You can change the decay and the hang instead of the period and these values over here based on this formula. Again, you can kind of fool with these to get things to look how you want them to. This option here turns on signal peaks. So if I go over here and put this on 3, you can see what's going on now. It gives us a number and a little symbol, to tell us where the strongest signal currently is. Now, you may not be able to see it, but we got a strong signal over here to the right. And then we've got signal 2 over here and signal 3 here. If we click on this maximum button, you can see what happens is it leaves sort of a maximum line where the maximum signal was. So if you're interested in looking at that, you can turn that on. The signal history button here toggles this display down here on and off. So you can kind of see what happens. If I turn it off, we get more waterfall. If we turn it back on, there's the signal history. This button here allows us to change the color of what we're seeing on the screen. Right now I've got mine set to Spectra View. I kind of like that one the best. But you can choose between a few different presets here, as you can see. I think blue and white is the default. Or you can set your own custom palette by going to that option and fooling around in here. This button here changes the resolution of the waterfall display down here. And you can see the higher the number we get, the more sort of smoothing and streaking we get in the waterfall. So depending on which look you like, you can set that to however you want. So over here, this speed button will change sort of the speed of the waterfall. You can see the higher the number, the faster it goes, and the lower the number, the slower it goes. So depending on what you want to capture, you can set that however you like. So under here, the windowing button, if we change some of the options in here, you can see that it changes the waveform shapes a little bit. So over here, we can turn on the timestamp, and you can see what it does is it adds a line down here to the waterfall. So this is useful if you're trying to look at signals that maybe have a time signature or something like that. You can kind of figure out what's going on in that regard. And then here, you can turn off whether that timestamp is UTC or local time. So you can see by checking UTC, it gives us UTC time, and by unchecking it, it changes that to local time. These options here turn on or off various things that you see on the screen over here. So for instance, if we turn the clock off, you can see that the clock over here went away. If I turn it back on, it comes back. And you can see, just like with the timestamp, I can change that between UTC or local time by checking or unchecking this box. This button here toggles on or off the statistics window over here in the lower right. This button here toggles on and off the frequency display that's right here. In fact, I'm going to turn that off. And if you're listening to broadcast FM, this button here will toggle on or off the RDS display. But unless you're listening to broadcast FM, you're really not going to see anything with RDS. These options over here, you can see there's an auto center and a mouse over buttons. And then under here, there are more options that you can choose. I'm not going to go through all of these at the moment since I don't really use them that much. So for now, I'm going to skip over the receive menu options. For the purposes of this demo, we're not going to need anything up here. And also with the transmit, we don't have a transmitter, so we're not going to need anything there as well. Record and playback, you can go over here, and if you want to do just that, record and playback, these are the options that you would use. Again, I'm going to leave that for another demo another time. Under the Favorites tab, we have some various options that we can use for quickly tuning around between the bands. So over here on the left, you have a bunch of options for managing the favorites. You can add, update, organize, change the selection, or show a tree, which displays over here if we click the button. And then you can expand the tree and navigate that way if you want. But if you don't want that in the screen, you can just simply turn that off. And you'll get all of those options over here under these pull downs. So if we click under this amateur button, you can see that all of the amateur bands are listed, or at least the ones that are entered into SDR Console by default are here. If you want to add some of your own, that's where adding and updating and all that sort of thing over here would come in handy. And then over here we have some for broadcast bands. We've got long wave, medium wave, and so on and so forth. This one here is for broadcast FM. You can see there's some options here that we can choose. There are some default tabs. There's a default tab here for WWV. We could quickly tune to those, or the RWM frequencies. And again, you can use the options here to add or organize these favorites however you see fit. These are just the predefined options loaded into SDR Console. Over here, we have a Memories tab, so if you wanted to start storing particular frequencies into memory so that you could quickly recall them, you can do that here. I'm not going to go into this in this video either. I'll save that for another time. So under the Tools tab, we have some more advanced options, things that you can do, disable screensavers, set up a DX cluster, so on and so forth. You can kind of see what's up here. Again, I'm not going to go into these in this particular video. And then, of course, here you can get help if you want to get some help with running SDR Console. You can see there's various links to social media. There's an About page, and if you want to make a small donation to the authors, you can do that as well using this button. So I think I'll wrap things up there. If I went through all of the options in this software, we'd probably be here for hours. But I think this gives somebody who hasn't used this software or maybe hasn't used it in a while a basic overview and snapshot of what it can do and sort of how it works in a basic sense. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. And if you'd like to support my channel in another way, please check the description below for a link to my Amazon influencer page. Thanks for watching.